Hello.
Good evening. I am Kimberly Blackrincan. I hear a little feedback. Eduardo. Great. We're good? Okay. All right, now I can speak without hearing an echo of myself. Good evening. My name is Kimberly Blackrincan. I'm the director here at the ignITe Hub. Welcome, welcome to our second Fireside Chat of this year. We have an amazing speaker, Jennifer Bahrami, who's going to talk to us about her career and how she got here, and she's going to inspire us with some words. But before we get started, I just want to remind you or let you know, because we have new people that come every time, and we have return guests, which always makes me very happy because that tells me we offer value, right, if people come back. So I appreciate that. The Hub is a vibrant, hybrid, collaborative environment with cutting-edge Apple technology to learn, innovate, solve community problems, spur entrepreneurship, spark career interest, and deepen the community's tech talent in Montgomery County. So that's what we're here to do, and that's part of why we're here tonight. This is part of our speaker series that we have at the Hub. This is the Fireside Chat Career Series. This is sponsored by Verizon, so we can thank them for this amazing series this spring. This evening, we have Miss Jennifer Bahrami. She is the founder and CEO of Strategy and Pitch. Jennifer is a strategic advisor guiding organizations and leaders through a changing world. As a former chief communications and marketing officer, she has a clear vision, a deep understanding of stakeholder needs, and an ability to build trusting collaborative networks. Energized by a challenge, Jennifer has helped organizations such as Global Education Leader, International Baccalaureate, health technology firm CNSI, the World Bank, the UN Global Compact, Bank of America, and dozens of others build new programs, expand their reach, navigate drastic internal changes, and weather multiple crises with unscathed reputations. While Jennifer's education and early experience was not in technology, she found her way into technology through work with the federal government shortly after beginning her consulting career. She spent a decade supporting federal open data initiatives and state Medicaid modernization efforts. Jennifer learned through this that while technology is critical, understanding people is even more important. During her time with both public and private sector technology leaders, Jennifer developed a keen sense of what drives innovation. The most successful technology leaders always listened deeply and found opportunities to put their people, customers, and stakeholders first. Jennifer has been a Montgomery County resident for 12 years and was a 2019 finalist in the Washington Exec STEM Advocate of the Year Awards, and currently serves on the board of serves on the board of Learning Undefeated, a nonprofit which is driving race and gender equity in STEM. Jennifer, welcome. We're so honored to have you here this evening at the Hub. So for those of you that are returning, you can see we do our fireside chats a little different each time. Sometimes we do a presentation, sometimes we do an actual fireside chat, like an Oprah style event. So that's what we're going to do this evening. Jennifer does have some slides. So I'm going to start us off though with some questions just to get us going. And then we'll have time for question and answer, anything that you'd like to know about her. So Jennifer, we heard your bio, but how did you get into what we just heard of all of the amazing work that you do? Tell us a little bit.
Sure. So first of all, let me tell you how I didn't get into technology. When I was in college, I did marketing and communications, and I had a very good friend who was German. He'd moved to the US. He had worked at Apple. And as we were getting ready to graduate, he said, you know what? I'm going to go do a tech startup, and I'm going to found something, and I'm going to make tons of money, and it's going to be amazing. Come join me at the tech startup. And I remember looking at him and going, I have no interest in technology. No. And so I said, you go do your tech startup and I will see you on the other side. And he did. And he sold it several years later for many millions, and he's doing very well. I chose to go into publishing at the time. And I was convinced that I really want, one of the things that I'll share with you in a minute was kind of my why and where I was going. But one of the funny things was that I went into publishing, and it's still books, magazines. That was what I was doing. But at the time that I went in to do that, that was the early 2000s. Guess what was happening? The entire world was going through a digital revolution. And so publishing was no longer what we knew it to be. We were talking about, how do we create ebooks? How do we create digital readers? How do magazines develop digital subscriptions? No, that's not for me. That technology stuff is not for me. So I'm going to start there, and I just want to share something quickly with you. So we're missing one picture, but just as my personal background, because I think that it's helpful to understand context in this day and age. You can never look at someone and just assume that what their lived experience has been. And so I wanted to kind of share with everyone here my lived experience, which was that I was born in England, raised in India, Nepal, and Peru. I came to the US when I was 18 years old. And so that was the first time that I called myself an American. So, in this day and age, especially with employees, when we think about identity, belonging, inclusivity, you should definitely never assume that someone is what you see, that we're not book covers. And so it's always really important to understand someone's context and lived experience. So as I was saying, I'm going to go to this slide. When I started out, we were in traditional advertising world. So what that meant was, when I was learning in college, we were learning about, how do you develop content to do a billboard and sell something in one line? And I was learning about basic user experience. What color should the website be? How do we develop a banner ad? And you can't see, for the folks who are in the room, you can't see the third slide, but it's an arrow. And what that was that we were told we must talk to our audience. That was the world I came out into. And guess what happened to that world in the first 10 years of my career? Google AdWords launched in 2000. The first iPod launched a year later. Facebook launched to the masses in 2004. Twitter came out. YouTube came out. All of a sudden, the first iPhone came out. So in a period of 10 years, the world we knew and how we engaged with that broader world shifted dramatically. And here's this person who said, I want nothing to do with technology. My world became technology. And so that kind of describes how I ended up here with all of these roles. Was all of a sudden, many organizations, so the World Bank, I helped them launch their first ever social media strategy for the continent of Africa. They had multiple languages, multiple countries, people living all over the world who wanted to be connected to Africa. And we had to think about, what does that look like? And again, going back to, how do you develop a strategy for a country when you're sitting millions of miles away? And what makes it real? And so there was a lot of interesting conversations at the time around how we accomplish that kind of work. Same with UN Global Compact, looking at, how do we think about what's happening in the world, the complexity of the world, and how do we help create a better world? So that's kind of how I ended up where I ended up, was just kind of following that technology wave that came across us, and beginning to talk to folks who wanted to engage with the outside world. And the biggest piece, and I don't see this slide here, but let me see if I can find it, is this. I put an alpaca there, partly because I did live on an alpaca farm and took care of alpacas at one point to pay for my grad school. But I put it there because no longer was it a one-sided world. The alpaca is our audience. They're our customers. They're our employees. And they're no longer just taking what we're giving them. They're coming back at us with whatever their perspective, their thoughts are, their needs. And so very quickly, you learn that if you're not ready to engage in a two-way world, and this is really important for leaders, then you're very, very, very far behind at this point.
So while you were on that journey, I love how you gave that timeline to help us go back. During that decade, or during that time, can you think of one or two just those moments we have in life, there was life before that and life after that. Do you have an inspirational experience that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. Yeah, great. Before I do, though, I've talked to a couple of you in the room, but I'm really curious. One of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is working with young people, talking and creating spaces for kind of all of these challenges that we're experiencing across the globe, and how do we handle that, and how do we create spaces for the next generation to really begin to feel like they are part of the conversation, not being told that they need to fix our problems. And in doing so, we sometimes use a method called human HSD, human system dynamics. And one of the pieces of that is that it's grounded in inquiry. And so to kind of ground this session in inquiry, I would love to ask all of you as we kick off, what are you wondering? Anybody want to share something about the session, something you're wondering right now as we kick off? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
I work with young people, college students also, and so I'm curious to know how we can prepare people to start in the workforce.
Yeah. So I'm not going to pretend to have any of those answers, but I think that it's really important to just put the questions out there, and maybe they will come to all of us as we go through this session. So going back to my inspiration, it's interesting because sometimes inspiration comes from very difficult times. And I remember I have always been, when you go back to where I started, I was very fortunate in that I was able to be raised in many different countries with many different viewpoints, and understanding that the world was way bigger than me and way bigger than my bubble. And in doing that, I grew up in the country, I lived in Peru for many, many, many years during a very tumultuous time. So I experienced things such as terrorism in my backyard. And so there were just things that as a young person, you bring with you and you carry with you, which meant that as I became an adult and went into the workforce and someone said, hey, you want to come into technology? Part of my no was that I felt like any job I took, I had to be able to know what was the positive social impact I was making or creating through that role. And that was really important. I've known that, I've had that deep inside of me since I was very young. It's something that some people spend a long time trying to figure out. And it's always really important to understand, what is your why? What is your purpose? It's different for all of us, and it means different things. But for me, I think I went to, at one point in my life, and I don't know if we'll talk about this later, but I became a mom and I had to make some concessions in what I did with my career. And I went to work for a corporation that I really had no idea. I did not understand federal work fully. I didn't understand government contracting. We did Medicaid work. I didn't understand health IT. I ended up spending 10 years there, so I really understand it now. But I remember working with, several hundred engineers every day. And I was the marketing communications person, and I was not an engineer, and I was not a techie. And so I remember one afternoon we were talking about a product we were going to launch. And they were talking in their engineer talk, this module is going to go here, and this is going to be interoperable here, and we're going to do this. And we were trying to figure out how to market it. And I said, you know what? Why don't we get some Legos? You keep saying this word modular, and Legos are modular. And so I happened to live at the time 10 minutes from my house. My job and house were close. And so I went home and I grabbed my kids' Legos and we put them on a conference table. And we said, okay, let's build this modular system that we're talking about, and let's actually create it. And I actually have a picture. Oh, I can't get to, but and you'll laugh when you see it because it is really, really simple and childish. But let's see if we can go to it. There you go. So that thing that's being covered in the corner there, you can't see it, but that was how we started this product development. That was a full modular Medicaid platform, but we started it with Legos. And here it was myself, it was 3 engineers, it was the CEO of the company, and we just played around and moved things around, and we were creative and we had fun. And we all brought our diverse perspectives into that conversation. And ultimately, we came up with something that is actually the core product that ended up selling this company. And so I share that to say, sometimes it's when you go you don't do the normal, you don't do what's expected. And I say that a lot in a lot of the work that I do. How do we create the unexpected? Because the expected is the path we're all going to take. The unexpected happens when we start bringing diversity into the room, when we start bringing diverse minds, diverse people, diverse thoughts, diverse ideas. And so we very much took this approach of the best idea wins, not the highest ranking person, and very much of there's no wrong. We can fail, we can get this wrong, we can say we wasted an afternoon with Legos, but we're just going to try.
Wow, that's so inspiring that sometimes it just goes to the basics, and you bring your Legos and it sounds like you created that space. You invited them to come in and sort of step out of the box. So you get what you need, but you also are able to bring that team together in a different way of thinking and lead to something like this that, as you say, was one of their most successful initiatives that they had. One of the things that stands out here in the bullets on your slide is embrace failure. I'd love to hear more about that. The young people that I work with, that they really struggle with that. It's sort of I don't even want to attempt it because I'm not going to be good at it. What can you say? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, and it's actually ironic because if you think about the younger generation, they actually get to try and fail over and over again because they are all digitally native and they get to launch a podcast. It doesn't work. I stop it. I rejig. I go and launch my new other thing and I my other thing. And it's easier than, in my generation, it took a lot of work to launch a podcast, or we had to hire a video company to do video and put a lot of money into it. And so for their generation, there's so much that they can do. But the problem is that within that realm of it being so easy, we also have this society of perfection. And so I don't have any, I think I'm a perfectionist. It is, I think many of us are in everything that we do. But I would say the embrace failure really comes from creating a culture and a work environment. So to your point about how we treat people, that sometimes the best ideas come from failure, right? Sometimes when we engage with someone and we're working on a project, that person who challenges us the most, who pushes us to maybe do more, do better, answer all those questions that to us are so obvious, that person is actually helping all of us level up our game. And so so to my perspective is, we shouldn't strive for perfection. We should strive for creating that safe environment where if something doesn't work out, we're going to rejig. And I would also add, just because I do come from years on the corporate side, that works when you have accountability, right? And you can say, here's what we're going to do. Here's what the culture is okay with, and here's how we're going to move forward. Doesn't work when someone goes, well, it's his fault and he failed, right? It's a very different mindset. So I think that overall, failure is super healthy. I have failed many times in my life, but through the failures, I feel like they all help you get to that stronger, better more improved place. And it's a really hard thing to do in business. It's a very scary thing to think that you failed. And I know when I started my own business and I left the corporate world, the failure was the number one thing on my mind. I'm going to fail at this, until you realize that I was defining failure. And so if nobody else was looking at me and saying she's going to fail. Fail was whatever I had created. And so how do you create, what is your win? What does progress look like?
That's a great segue into my next question of, and you started already, how was that jump from corporate to you're a founder and CEO of strategy and pitch? And since you mentioned failure and that mindset that you had, what helped you get through that?
Yeah. So I think that first off, it was a very tough transition. I don't know if it is for everybody, but there's a lot of self-doubt. And I know you also mentioned you'd started your business as well. And so I don't know if you have a similar perspective, but there's a lot of questioning yourself, and you're ultimately accountable only to yourself. And so that to me was incredibly scary. It meant that I do a lot of pep talking in my head all the time, because I need to remember my why. What did I set out to do? Why did I set out to do this? I am very conscious about making sure I celebrate my wins. And some weeks I may not have had a win, but I go, well, that little thing, that was my win. That was a win. And I'm taking it as a win this week. I also remember a lot of the reasons why I chose to leave. The things that I just saw a statistic today that 64% of women think that they could do their job better than their CEO. And I was one of those women. I definitely walked around and thought, I can do this better. I can build a better company. I have a better way of going about similar things. And I want the opportunity to be able to try that out. So again, going back to how you treat employees, I don't have thousands of employees today, but I know that when I do, I have lived and been through enough organizations and watched the transition of culture and corporations to know that I'm going to operate in a very different way than some of the organizations that I've supported or worked for. Does that answer that question?
And I don't have a mic, but go ahead and keep it. You give us like specific example of how you celebrate this.
Let's see. So it's really interesting. And I'm sure other entrepreneurs will feel this way as well, but sometimes, so when you set out, everybody starts their business in a different way, and I will tell you one thing, actually, I forgot to add this because I think I miss having support. And what I mean by that is I had an IT department before, right? I had someone who took care of the things that I wasn't, my accounting department. I had a finance team, and all of a sudden you're all of those things. And it is both exhilarating and also at times weighs you down, because you realize that you really wish that somebody else would just do that one budget thing, and somebody else is you. And so I think that has probably for me been a very big transition, to become a department of, one and many. A good example of how I celebrate my wins. So I do write down, I have a process that I learned from someone, which is that, every week I try to take, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and write down, well, what did I do this week? What did we accomplish that moves this business forward in some way? What did we do for a client that was a win? Who did we engage or meet with? Whatever those priorities are. And then I try to reflect back later on the week or the next week. Did we get there? Did we do any of these things? And some weeks life, as a parent, life falls apart sometimes. Your kids get sick and you're out for the count, and that week feels like a complete waste and loss. And I get mad at myself and I wish that, but then you also remember, hey, that's life, and that's real life. And again, it goes back to when you're on the corporate setting, you have to talk, hopefully you have a manager or leader or boss who goes, I get it. Life happens, and we've got you. So you've got to have yourself.
I have a great follow-up question about that. So yeah, that's a big jump, right? Where you go from, you have structures in place and support in place. But I know that you do have support and you do have a network as an entrepreneur. So tell us, how did you create that network for yourself and get that support in other ways?
Yeah, so some of it came from, years of building a network, and you definitely find opportunities where anyone you can meet. I noticed, both of you were connecting at dinner, and I was like, that's the kind of stuff that I found I did over the years. But I will also share it. For me, I've always been intentional about having true relationships. And I think that's really important, because oftentimes the higher you go in an organization, the less real your relationships become, the more alone you become as a leader, and people see you as the boss. And so they talk to you like they really like what you're saying, and everything you say is really funny, and your jokes just got funnier. But you realize really quickly that if you don't continue and keep those authentic relationships, then all of that goes away when you move out of a particular role or that shifts. So I digressed from your original question. I just realized that. Yeah. So I have a couple. I'm part of a women's network for women across the US that I engage with on a kind of monthly and pretty regular basis, where we, whether it's I'm working on a project for the IB called the Festival of Hope, which is the youth-led program I was talking about. And for the Festival of Hope, we were going to 3 different countries across the world, and I really needed to hire a photographer and a production company that could help me in 3 different continents. And I was, getting stuck with that. And I reached out to this network and I go, hey, I really need an incredible, company organization. And it was amazing. What they came back with was a company that had just started, that focused on women are underrepresented and people of color are underrepresented in photography and production. And so they said, this is who we're going to hire. And so I was able to find photographers and production folks in the US, in the UK, and in India, all from this one company. And I would never have heard of them had I not been part of this network. I also, obviously, like all of us, have colleagues from former organizations, and I do make sure to stay in touch and connect. And then I think the biggest piece is try to help people and really, make sure that I'm of support to others, because you just never know what kind of relationships come when you're giving with not requiring anything in return. And I find that is huge. And I've learned that over time. And then the last thing I'll say, which you and I talked about a little bit, was that throughout my career, I've had 2 incredible coaches. And for me, one was funded by the company I worked for, and one was one that I paid for myself at a different point in time. So there's different ways to come across coaching. But coaching has been incredibly valuable, because sometimes we have blind spots about ourselves, about what we're really good at, what we're not really good at, what helps us thrive. And sometimes our coaches can, if you're willing to really be open with yourself, sometimes it's really helpful to have someone say, I hear this, or the people I've talked to who work with you say this, have you noticed you do this? And then it really helps you kind of evolve as a leader as well and stay connected to a broader community.
Another question I have, it's March, right? So it's Women's History Month, not Women's History, but it's Women's Month. So you're a woman and you've identified that way. And we've talked about leadership. So you've been in a leadership position in a corporation, but you're also a woman leader in your business. What kind of advice do you have for aspiring women or people who identify as women? What suggestions or tips do you have for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find this to be I know it should be an easy question, but I find it conflicting, because I grew up in a time where I was told as a woman, you should be able to do everything, right? The generation that came before me, we fought, we got you to where you need to be. Now you can have a career, you can be a mom, but what I find happened to women in my generation was that we all burned out trying to do everything. And we were sold a bill of, this is how success, this is what success looks like. And here's the path you need to take to get there. And it doesn't matter if you fall apart or that falls apart, you just keep going because that's success. There's a ladder and you climb it. And I reject that now. And so I guess what I would say to younger women is know what you want, know what you need. There is not one path, and there is not one ladder, and there's not one table. And so that, and frankly, for everybody, male or female, or, you know, however you identify yourself, to me, it's the true north these days is really what value are you bringing? Where will you take whatever your purpose is? How will you take it? How will you get there? And so, you know, we talked a little bit at the beginning about kind of that gap you feel missing teaching. And it's that piece of what are the small steps that I can take every day? And when I do that, isn't that success? Because at the end of the day, now I'm serving a community that needs somebody like me in that space. And so I think if you were brought up in a way that said a corporate job at the top is the way to go, I think that that is a complete fallacy, and actually to some extent doesn't even serve us in many ways. And so I'm really happy to see how the world of work is shifting. I think we are still shifting. I think we've gone to extremes. I think we will find a middle ground at some point. And I think that for every single person, the last couple of years has probably shifted their dynamic with work in different ways. And for me, it was wonderful. But meaning I was able, somebody gave me permission to spend more time with my family and not be embarrassed about it. Because as a female leader, I was made to feel like I couldn't talk about my children. Or if I showed up at 8:30 in the morning, some of the leaders in the room with me, and going back to success, I was successful at a very young age. I was always one of the youngest in the room, and I was always one of the only women in the room, sitting in board meetings or with senior leadership. Part of that was because I knew who I was, I knew what I wanted, and I used my voice. So yeah, I would say to anybody, use your voice. Do not expect anyone to come and know what they think you need. Make sure you communicate what it is you want or need, because nobody is a mind reader, and we always don't know what is right for someone else. So I think that would kind of be my thinking around all of that. And I realize that I get really excited and passionate about things, and then I forget your original question. I'm like, did I answer it?
And I love what you say about that, thinking about the women's liberation movement and all that came out of that. And I'm in circles with other women that are saying, you know what, I am unlearning everything that I was taught. It's not serving me. So it resonates with me what you're saying of it doesn't work, or it's not working for me the way I thought it was going to work, or how can I find that balance? So that's a really important message, I think, that you're sharing with us, whether it's ourselves as women or all of us that have young women or older women in our lives. That's a really important message. So thank you for sharing that. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to say. Are you open to some questions? All right. We have guests both virtually. Welcome. I'm looking at the camera. And we have guests here in the space as well. Anybody want to start us off with some questions for Jennifer? Sure.
Jennifer, this evening you're in giving this particular talk. When you're telling or meeting, for instance, the CEO and the engineers with your Lego set, how do you get through to their resistance? They're normally telling the public or their employees what they perceive and want to do. You're trying to change the dynamic with them. How much resistance was that? And what do you think you accomplished? And how do you think that you changed the 3 engineers and the CEO of that firm?
So it's interesting because when you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to create change within an established organization and you're doing something that is not natural for that culture, that organization, it is an uphill battle. But change always is, right? And culture change especially can always feel like that. And so a couple things that I would say is I had already built trusted relationships with my leaders and my colleagues. So I wasn't coming in and saying, hey, here's how I think we should do it, and we should do it this way now, right? It was you, and that goes back to how you treat people. Are we creating a culture of trust? Are we creating a culture of transparency and authenticity? The CEOs I've worked for know that I'm honest with them. They know that I'm not a yes person, and they know that if I say or suggest something, I will provide my best counsel. Now, there are many times where I've provided best counsel, especially in like high profile litigation issues where you're dealing with a corporate reputation or a lawsuit, where I will say, here's what I really think we need to be doing, and this is going to be risky, and you at some point say, but this is my best counsel. You are the CEO, so you have to make the decision. And so you are able to engage in those discussions around what is best. Another good example, is I had to help lead an organization through a major DEI initiative. And that was really, really interesting because the organization was not ready to take it on, and they were not ready to have difficult conversations. And so we spent a lot of time just getting to that place of, can we trust each other enough to start the difficult conversations? So it sounds really sad, but or not sad, but just obvious. But all of those things come back to all those really simple pieces. Are we treating our employees like they're one of us? Are we engaging with someone because I respect them? Are we creating trust? So I come in when we go into the Lego thing or any other kind of issue that may not be natural to the organization, it's really just around, do we have a relationship? Have we built trust? Will you listen, right? Will we engage in a conversation where we can listen to each other and build from there?
Any other questions? I was looking to see if we had any questions in the chat. No? Okay.
So what is your take on CEOs making millions of dollars while employees are not even making living wages?
I feel like that's a minefield for me to walk into. I have a personal take and I have a professional take, right? My personal take is that our systems, we live in a complex world and our systems do not serve us. And my personal take on it is that the systems that run how we operate probably all need to be transformed, right? And frankly, disrupted. And so that would be my personal take. From a very practical, logical perspective, do I agree with it? No. Do I think that there are good ways to run a business, create profit, serve people? 100%. And I think that there are, in the last couple of years, what's been encouraging is to see that becoming more and more of a topic of conversation. And so I've spent a significant part of my career in this corporate social responsibility space and thinking about what that means for different corporations of different sizes. And you and I were talking at dinner, right? For the much larger companies of the world, it's complex because if you build a big box in a particular city, and you'd ask the question, well, they have a foundation, but why aren't they just paying their employees more? Sometimes there's politics at play. We create the foundation because we've been told we can only come into that city and serve that city if we're funding businesses or supporting livelihoods in that city. And that is a very common tool that is used across many businesses, which is, we're a global business, but we need to have local impact. And part of that local impact is to come into a place and see how we can show that we are serving. And we see it here in the DMV, all the time. So is there a better way? Absolutely. Are there companies out there, the 1%, all who are doing this kind of work? 100%. Do I think it's going to become the norm anytime soon? No. Should it be? Yes, it would change the world. If we spent as much money as we did on, football, as we did on solving some of our greatest challenges, the world may be in a different place. But it's just our systems are not built that way or created that way. So I'm not satisfying you with my answer, because the person who's worked in corporate America knows how it's stacked. And the idealist in me says, I know where I wish it could go.
We have a question in the chat, and then I'll come to you, okay? The question is from Taj. What is the next community or business goal for strategy and pitch in 2023 that is on your checklist? And feel free to tell us a little bit about your business.
Oh, so I know Taj, by the way. I did not know he was joining tonight, though. So Taj and I worked at the Lego company together. I'm going to call it that. But we didn't work closely together, and we actually became closer friends after he left and after I left than when we were working there, which again says something interesting about the work environment today. But so again, we talked about failure and embracing failure. And while I don't feel like strategy and pitch was a failure, I do feel like I have more, I've learned over the last year and a half where I want to take it. And so I'm actually going to be pivoting in the next year. And what that means is strategy and pitch was Jennifer Bahrami, former chief communications and marketing officer, going out into the world to solve reputation crises and work on kind of large corporate initiatives that created impact. And there will still be some of that. But in the last year and a half, one of the most joyful things I've been able to do is create the Festival of Hope. And the Festival of Hope is this digital and in-person dialogue with young people from 152 countries in 6,000 different schools, where we're basically saying, we know the weight of the world is on your shoulders. We see it in our research. We understand you're coming out of the pandemic with a lot of mental health concerns, and you're not necessarily being given the platform to communicate what you need or what are those conversations you want to have. And so we actually, funnily enough, we went to Southside Chicago and we worked with 4 high schools in that area, and we put on a day-long event called Festival of Hope Chicago. And we actually brought up youth advocates who were young leaders who were focused on mental health, using your voice to move something forward. They talked about, we had this young man from Navajo Prep talk about what it's like to be a Native American growing up in the digital age. And so through all of those efforts, we went to the UK in December, and we're going to India in June this year. And we're having, because as we know, while we have global problems, they are rooted locally. And so we are having these conversations with local communities, with young people. And through that process, one thing I've learned is that, going back to young people and perfectionism, right? Everybody has something to say right now. And if you put yourself out there and you look out at the world, you go, well, I'm not really different because that person's saying this, or that person's doing this kind of work, and it can feel overwhelming. But what I've found is that in the sea of information, what we're actually not doing is connecting and leveraging all of our knowledge. And so we will, to a long-winded answer to Taj's question is, we are going to be launching Good Impact Labs at the end of this year. And Good Impact Labs is just that. It is a bridge and a connector and an amplifier of all the amazing things that are happening across the world to solve some of our greatest challenges, whether it's climate change, mental health, identity issues. So that's what I'm really excited about for the next year.
That's awesome. Thank you. We have a question over here.
Thanks, Jennifer. You talked about, when you just, I guess, left school and how you got drawn into the IT world, and you had to kind of modify your behavior and your study to get there. we're kind of at the break now that we're going into not only we're in a digital world, we're going into AI world, which is going to take over perhaps 85, 90% of our jobs. In Japan today, 75% of the workforce is robotics. So how do you prepare and teach our young people what to expect and possibly not having jobs coming soon for many of them?
So I was going to start this conversation we were going to have with a joke done by our dear friend ChatGPT, but I didn't because I couldn't quite figure out why I was doing that, except that it felt like it's in every conversation I'm having right now. So I spend a lot of time in the education world, and education is, turning upside down with ChatGPT. But I think where we're netting out is it still doesn't matter, right? So yes, the skills of the future are not the skills of yesterday, and that is very clear. But we still need skills. We still need jobs. They're just not going to be the same kinds of jobs. And so I think as what we're seeing, and as we talk to young people, it's what are those human-centered capabilities? How do we create dialogue? So how do we talk to each other and engage in a way that kind of builds on something? I think understanding a global mindset is going to be a skill of the future, because what happens in this room can make its way to the entire other side of the planet. So is everything changing? It is, but I could be completely wrong, but I just feel like it's just not going to be as dramatic as we feel. Now, I will say I ended this with my picture of me and Pepper, the robot, who spoke to me at a conference. And so I know that there is significant change coming, but I think it's about understanding and developing those skills for tomorrow. And they're just not the same skills that and believe it or not, one of the things that for me is ironic, but also joyful, is that I've always been one of those people that believes that hard skills are critical, but the soft skills are what take you places. And that has not been popular during my adulthood. It is becoming more of the case. And actually, when Kimberly and I first started talking about this particular session, I wanted to talk about initially was I spend a lot of time with people in technology. And at some point, you hit a level in your career where having the best technical skills is not good enough. You've got to be able to lead, communicate, manage, engage. That's where you begin to really drive both people, culture, and innovation, right? And so I think for me, those skills, that part of the world is just beginning to wake up and just beginning to realize we have all the hard stuff figured out, but now we've got to figure out all this other stuff up here and get really good at it.
Thank you. Oh, great.
But being a mom and raising kids is incredibly difficult, in my opinion. So what other changes would you like to see in terms of employers providing, offering support to moms and also people with various kinds of disabilities?
Yeah, so I think I spent $100,000 on childcare when I had 2 toddlers, right? And I was trying to build a career, so I wasn't home. So I completely, and not out of choice, right? Out of necessity. So I paid college tuition for daycare, and that is the reality for many, many, many families. Our country is woefully behind in supporting working parents, and it is, to me, seems like something that should just be a given. And I really don't, I am not an expert in the space, but I don't understand why it is not easier for us in this country to just make those policy changes that would support families, that would ultimately help business, that would ultimately create an innovation. So similarly, for people with disabilities, and I spent a significant amount of time in the Medicaid space, and those are some of our neediest Americans, and there are many Americans who are disabled. And I saw the impact that was had on individuals who maybe were it not for having the ability to get that kind of support or healthcare, they could have jobs. They could be supported to build a living. And so it seems like these are like low hanging fruit things. And I work with a number of colleagues across the world, and they're always surprised to hear what it's like to work in America. No joke. I mean, I've also managed teams in other countries, and some of the things that just seemed very straightforward to me, very simple things like, hey, this person has decided to leave. Okay, they're going to give a 2 weeks notice. That is unheard of in some parts of the world. My colleagues in the UK have to give 3 months notice, right? You cannot, if someone is of a certain age, you cannot just fire them. If someone has been at a company for a certain number of years, there's just a significant amount of policies in place that support all kinds of people. And I don't think we've done that. We are definitely a workaholic culture and a country, and focused on, profit probably before people.
Until you just said that about profit versus people, my question was like, but still, maybe it still is. So I have students, and they seem to have that perspective that when they come up with new ideas of things that they want to do with their lives, the people and the need is in the middle and not the profit. I just don't hear that, which is really awesome. But I'm wondering if, with your global perspective, if there is a model in another part of the world, maybe that we could use to start to make some changes in that direction.
So it's interesting. I am steeped in Gen Z, and I think I was supposed to be Gen Z. I was just born in the wrong generation, because I've had the most fun with my 19-year-old colleagues across the world in the last year and a half. They are the most diverse generation. They are also the most socially inclined. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear. And given what they've grown up in and seen, it makes a lot of sense. So, not to sound too idealist and to not project any, I do a lot of work with folks from all over. I will say that the one country that keeps coming back into my sphere is Finland, and kind of their education model, their parenting, their policies, how they treat diversity. I mean, just it's a really interesting country to look at. There has been a significant amount of research done on, I know I'm going to misquote this, so nobody quote me on this, but the OECD has done a lot of research on kind of what does create kind of a happy place to live. And in that list of countries, Finland being one of them is kind of an interesting place to start. And one of my former CEOs, who is the former Minister of Education for Finland, actually talked about kind of what some of those pieces are, but I am not an expert on it, so I wouldn't want to comment too deeply. Yeah, why not? But I think, my personal perspective, though, is that everything ideally is good, but again, it's rooted in local. And so if your local context doesn't fit the ideal, the system change is never going to happen. And so that's where I'm a pragmatist in the perspective of, we know where we may want to go, but we also know that not everybody wants to go there with us. And so how do we bring people along into a change? How do we shift the system slowly and make sure we bring people with us as we go. And that takes work and it takes time, and it's a uphill battle, but it's one that we're all going to be probably this journey we're going to be on for many years to come.
Thank you. Oh, great. And oh, good. We have 2 questions. We'll go to you and then we'll go to Raj.
My question to you, Jennifer, is as an entrepreneur creating your own business, the challenges that you faced and words of wisdom for future mentorship, like people trying to figure out, like, would you do anything differently? Lessons learned. Sometimes it's good to hear other people's advice as far as your journey, so obviously different from others, but the challenges you faced, lessons learned, and any words of inspiration for people following in your footsteps. And how big is your company? Like, how many people?
So lessons learned, what I would do differently. I wouldn't wait so long to do what I really wanted to do. So we always have to do certain things because we have to, right? I had to pay for childcare if I wanted to build a career. I didn't want to, but so there's certain things that we have to do that are, whatever the circumstances are of our life are, we have to. So within whatever your lived experience is and within wherever you are in your life, don't let fear drive it, because I did for a very long time. And I know, looking back now, I realize, and there's always something to say. Every experience that you have professionally does lead to something. It all is, the bad ones and the good ones, because learning what you don't want to do is really, really important. And so I would say that, but at the same time, all of us get to that place where we're just dragging our feet because we know it's the fear. Don't just do it. Just take the leap, because ultimately, if you ask yourself that question, what's the worst possible thing that could happen if I did this right now? And the answer is fear, shame, embarrassment. I may take a pay cut for 3 months, but I could jump back into the market, whatever that is. If it's not super extreme, then you should go for it. And that is something I've thought of multiple times over the last year and a half. Inspiration. I don't know. I mean, for me, inspiration is very external. And so I am daily inspired by the things I learn from others. And so I would say always learn. And I will share actually right now, because I am an avid reader. And so I shared what's on my bookshelf. And these are books that have come back onto my bookshelf again and again. And I'll share a little bit about the why of each one in case it's helpful. So The Innovator's Dilemma is kind of like the book on innovation. So highly recommended. And it talks about why some companies innovate significantly and then fail to innovate during the next wave. Next Level. This book is for anybody who is stepping up in their career. When you get to the next level, it's written by someone locally. They actually use examples from several leaders in the DC area, but this book was really critical when I went from being a VP to a C-suite. There's a jump there, or even now, right, as your own CEO, there's a jump that happens, and there's a mind shift that happens, and there's a reason why you're put in that role, and you really need to change. So one of my biggest lessons was many of us, especially those of us that are perfectionists, we learn to be successful because we're the go-to person. I can trust you to make sure that this happens. I'm going to go to Jen because Jen's going to make this a success. As you go higher in your career, you can't be the go-to person. It doesn't work. You've got to be the person who delivers on what they expect you to deliver on, and you've got to leverage all the other go-to people. And so there's a lot of good insights in that book around that. And then the 3 on the bottom, if you have an interest in social impact, Alex Budak's Becoming a Changemaker is amazing. He teaches a class at Berkeley and is just really smart. All of you may have heard of Abby Wambach. If you have a young woman, sorry. Abby Wambach's book is amazing and very inspirational for young women and women of all. And then the third one that I'll put out there for you is Alex Bonignon. If you've not read The Third Door, but you want to think about things differently, read this book. Alex basically started out as like an 18-year-old who said, I'm going to write a book and learn from the most famous people in the world what made them successful. I'm going to get Bill Gates, right? He named every big name. He couldn't get to them. So in his journey to try to get to them, he realized that there's a door that we're all allowed into because we are privileged enough to have that door open for us. And there's the door that we all take because it's the door that on the ladder we are told to follow. And then there's the third door, which is the door we break our way into one way or another because we just got to achieve something. And so Alex talks a lot of, so it's a really funny book. And just from the Persian perspective, he's Persian. And so he has a lot of really funny stories about his Persian grandmother who's like, you're not finishing college. So I definitely recommend that. So my inspiration is, I think the knowledge, the always learning, having that bookshelf that you can go back to at different points of your life is huge.
Thank you. That's okay. Raj had a question.
You mentioned Finland as one of the countries that keeps coming up again and again. If I remember right, I believe either Finland or one of the Scandinavian countries, I think they pay highest salaries to school teachers, I think. So anyhow, so you mentioned Finland. I'm just wondering whether you would be comfortable mentioning at least one or two companies that you really admire. And also another question is, if you were to have a magic wand, what is one thing that you would like to change if you have all the power?
So I would be comfortable mentioning companies that I would admire, but I don't know if I even believe in that idea anymore. And I say that because, 5 years ago, I would have listed off a number of tech firms like we talked about. And I said, oh, Twitter, the culture, the da-da-da-da-da. But the world is changing so quickly. And honestly, having been inside many companies, I don't know if anyone's got it right. I think we're all trying, and I think there's a lot of companies that are doing some good things. But I'm not sure I feel confident enough to say I really admire. You know what? I mean, the one that I can say I feel pretty strongly about, Patagonia, right? I appreciate what they built from a closed business. I appreciate what their owner and their founder has done. And I appreciate how he's kind of taken that and speaking to employees who have worked there. The culture is real. It's authentic. Another company that I will name that I've long admired, Chobani yogurt. Read about their CEO, read about his history, his past, and kind of how they've actually created their yogurt empire. Really interesting company and background. So I also think admire, we should think a lot about, is a very personal thing. So I would have at one point in my life said I admire any company that gives paid parental leave, for whatever. Now I think it's a more complicated mix. But yeah, I would look at Chobani. I would look at Patagonia as options. I'm trying to think of someone who's more local to the DC area, but it'll come to me. Let me think about it. Oh yeah. Probably inequity, which is a really tough one. But it's going back to our systems and why the world doesn't work. A lot of it stems from inequity. And so if I had a magic wand, what would the world look like if we all started at the same place?
Thank you. I would drop the mic, but it's real expensive. So thank you. That was really powerful. Yeah. If we had that, if you had that magic wand, that's a powerful question. What if we all started out on the same field? Thank you. Excellent. Any other questions, or you feel like we're good space? You shared your amazing story. You answered amazing questions. That magic wand question, I'm gonna use it again, Raj. Okay. That's a good one. Do you have any closing words for us or anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I was hoping, since we started an inquiry, if we could end an inquiry. And so I'd love to just put up 2 prompts out there and just hear any thoughts from all of you. One prompt could be, what's one thing you heard today that surprised you? And the other prompt could be, on the one hand, I heard this, but on the other hand, this. So either one of those, if anyone wants to kind of take the prompt. Sure. On the one hand, I heard you say that you loved books, but on the other hand, you didn't say blah, blah, blah. So something maybe where you felt there was one thing versus the other, they didn't quite add up. You were left wondering about that. Or it could just be, I heard something, this surprised me.
Sorry. Please, it's for the people in the chat. Thank you.
No problem. Someone had a question or a comment regarding AI, which is something that I'm involved with, but it depends on how you use it. I'm using it to solve problems in the areas of breast cancer and prostate cancer. And so I think it's a useful tool to have when it comes to solving problems like that.
Yes. Anyone else? In the chat, maybe? I don't know.
I think, just to clarify, I think that's a really important point, which is at the end of the day, well, I started this saying I don't want to have anything to do with technology. My world has been shaped by health technology, which is critical to, when we talk about inequity, when we talk about, changing lives, education technology. Had there not been technology over the last 3 years during the pandemic, imagine what learning would have been like. So 100% that there is so much good that can come from all of these innovations.
Circling back to what you were asking about, you said this, but you also said that, well, just the innovation and the technology, but then I feel like the regular book, like my first job out of like across the street from my high school was at a bookstore. So it's still relevant, the years of spending in the library and how books still motivate, as well as technology and Zoom and being able to bring the world, you said 3 continents, you brought them all together. Like that's pretty cool how technology works, but also respecting the past and enjoying holding a book and getting quotes that inspire. So I like that. And then also the Festival of Hope, because growing up, it's funny, my father was a social worker and there was a fundraiser. It's a nonprofit, but called the Festival of Hope. Can you explain a little bit more about your Festival of Hope?
Yeah, so not a festival, the term. I'd love to actually, so definitely check it out. So on YouTube, if you just search for the Festival of Hope channel, all of the interviews and sessions that we've held so far, both virtual interviews and then also the live interviews are all up on our channel. And again, it's led by young people, for young people. The virtual interviews are actually intergenerational dialogue. So it's leaders in a field of some kind being interviewed by students from somewhere in the world. The one that's kind of interesting, if you're interested in this whole inquiry concept in HSD, is the turning problems into patterns with adaptive action. That one's really interesting with Glenda Young, who runs HSD, and she has 2 students from Michigan who talk to her about it and how that could be used in their lives. Similarly, the one that moved me the most was Arifa Nassim, was a young woman in school who at 15 wanted to had read a book about forced marriage and gender violence, and she wanted to run a fundraiser in her school in the UK. And the principal of the school said, well, not this year, honey. And she went, okay, and you go focus on your studies. Next year came around, a new principal came around, and she said, okay, I want to run this fundraiser. It's really important. And they said, no, I don't think this is going to happen this year. You should really be focusing on your studies and getting A's so you can graduate. So another year goes by and she finally goes, I really need to do this. And they said, okay, this year you can do it, but you've got to keep studying and all the rest. She ran it. She raised more money than the school had ever raised in anything else. She also got straight A's in all of her final exams, but she taught, and she ended up becoming a UN youth ambassador and going on to do amazing things. But she talks about that all of us have to find that linchpin, that thing that makes our heart hurt. And when it makes our heart hurt enough, we will move into action. And so those are the kinds of conversations that we're having through Festival of Hope and just putting out there, which has been a lot of fun.
Would you like to talk about Board of Learning Undefeated?
So Learning Undefeated was founded here in Maryland. It was used to be called the MD Biolab, and they had a truck, and the truck goes out to middle schools across, used to go out to middle schools across Maryland. About 5-6 years ago, no, my engagement with them came when I was on the corporate side. And again, I was working on corporate social responsibility work, and there was this company that we wanted to, have volunteers go out to, and we were going to fund them. But the more I got to learn about them, the more amazed I was by how innovative they were and how they were thinking. So an example of this is Hurricane Harvey hits Texas, and there's an entire area of Texas that now has schools closed for months on end. But there's seniors who need to go to, if they don't finish science, they're not going to college. And nobody's going to be like, oh, sorry, the hurricane. Yeah, we'll wait. And so Learning Undefeated, who was at the time here in Maryland, had a truck that was about to get renovated, a lab. And they said, why don't we just send it down to those schools in Texas? Let's hold classes in the truck for these students and help them finish high school so they can get there. So they did that. They started then getting involved in Texas in general. And what they realized was that the truck was large and cumbersome, and it just was hard to do. So they started thinking about, what if we had a shipping container? And that's what that is. And they said, what if we had a shipping container and we turned it into this amazing high-tech lab, and students we could drop anywhere. So if there's a hurricane somewhere, we can drop it there. If there's an earthquake, whatever it is, it's a disaster relief educational building. And so they created Drop Anywhere Labs, and they have 4 of them now, and they serve multiple states. They are, they were funded also by Verizon to kind of do some labs as well. And it's pretty cool. So the latest lab that they just launched, what I just saw, excuse me, was like a, what do you call it? Where you go and solve the problem, like like we pay and we go and you solve a challenge and a puzzle inside a room, escape room. Yeah, it's an escape room experience to learn technology. And so it's really cool. But the coolest part about it was actually, I brought my kids with me to experience it that day. And so the grownups in the room are like, okay, where's step 1? Where's step 2? Is there instructions? The kids are throwing things around and lifting. They solved it 10 minutes before the grownups did, because they're so free, right? They're just experiencing, learning, absorbing, and the grownups, we're just waiting for permission to start. So Learning Undefeated is a pretty cool organization. They are now national. They train educators. They do online learning, and their entire mission is to serve underserved populations. And so they also had someone from NASA recently, and they're their real focus is how do we bring STEM to those students who had no idea it even exists or that they could get into technology? How do we ignite their excitement around this?
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Taj. Very interesting hearing about your global background and overseas upbringing, education, and community drive. Do you believe with yourself driving change globally that a seat at the global table for strategy and pitch, as you mentioned with Festival of Hope, we will see you on headliners sooner than later?
So I hate being in the front, and my career has been about putting other people in front. I think that Good Impact Lab / strategy pitch will have a global presence, and my partner is actually in France, and so we already are planning for that, because at the end of the day, while our problems are rooted locally, it is going to take a global effort, and so that is a lot of kind of what this where we are going. Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you.
This expectation or encouraging people to reach the top. I feel like this is not meant for everyone, because that requires a combination of, as you talked about, various skill sets, and everybody either is not interested in acquiring all those or incapable of. So in this context, what do you think people should define success as?
So my definition of success is what is best for me and those around me. And that was not always my definition. And maybe I'm at a privileged place in my life. I've built a career. I have an income, and so I'm able to say that. So I say that with some hesitation, because not all of us have that privilege to be able to do something we even want to do. But ultimately, can we find ways in small and big where we feel that we have done something that is about us, for us, and for those around us? And I think then that's success. But that is not our standard definition of success. And so it's a tough one. But I remember I had a close family friend whose father worked for the State Department, and he was murdered by terrorists in the country that he was serving. And he was about 60 years old, and he'd walked out of his house one morning and he was shot. And we were at the funeral here back in the US. And his wife turned to us and we said, we can't believe he's gone. We can't believe this happened to him. And she said, you know what though? Last night, it just so happened, she said the night before he passed or he was killed, she said, he turned to me and he said, I'm so happy. I'm doing what I want to do, where I want to do it. And I always kept that with me. Success should be, are you doing what you want to do, where you want to do it? And are you working towards getting to that place? And if you're working towards that, then for me, that means that you're successful, because as we all know, at the end of the day, that's the conversation we're going to be having, right? It's not, was I CEO and who did that matter to? It's really going to be, did I live the life I wanted to live? Did I do the things I wanted to do? Did I serve the people I wanted to serve?
Thank you. I think that's the last word for tonight. Jennifer, thank you so much for making time to come out here. And thank you to all of you for making time in your schedule to come out here. You have so many choices of where you can spend your time. And so I'm grateful that you chose to be here and to listen to our amazing speaker and hear about her journey. And wow, there were lots of pearls of wisdom in there. So thank you for that. Before you leave, we have a survey that we would like for you to complete. It's very short. Eduardo is going to put up the QR code in a moment, so you can just scan it on your phone. And those of you in the chat, the link will be in there shortly. So again, thank you for your time. Please fill out the survey so we can continue to offer speakers and opportunities and activities. We want to meet your need and your interests. So the only way we can do that, like Jennifer said, we're not mind readers. So please fill out that survey for us. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you.